Okay, so good evening, everyone. We're going to begin. My name is Michael Edwards. I'm assistant professor at the University of The Bahamas. Welcome to Mestre Projects. Before I introduce Matthew, I just want to kind of highlight the team here and kind of just express how impressed I am just in terms of what's developing here in the programming. And hopefully this is the first of many kind of public talks, right? So congratulations.
Thank you.
And so let me formally introduce our presenter, Matthew Rahming, who I've come to know over the years. I've worked with him closely, and we've been involved with several projects, both locally and abroad. And so congratulations.
Thank you.
On the show. So Matthew Rahming is an emerging interdisciplinary artist who identifies as an expressionist. His creative process is deeply rooted in introspection and keen observation. Rahming's work draws inspiration from both the vibrant present and experiences of the past. It often carries a duality with undercurrents and undertones of violence and fragility, while also conveying a sense of permanence and focusing on the meticulous beauty of life. Ooh. His choice of materials and symbols serve as a means to stretch the inherent tensions present in the work. They also function to frame the perspective of the audience, acting as a direct extension of his reinterpretation of his environment. And so there's a lot in that. And so I am really looking forward to our talk, our conversation. So Matthew's going to present. He's going to talk for about 25 to 30 minutes, thereabouts. And then we'll open it up for Q&A, some questions. So without further ado, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for coming. It's my pleasure to be here with you and share about what it means to make art and what it means for me to make this art. And it's really been a pleasure, and I'm really grateful to Jose and to Christina for the support that they've given me and shown me through the process and into the making and throughout here into the now. So I'd like to start with the title of the show, Wings of a Dove. Well, before I get to the title of the show, I'll tell you a little bit about my practice, just who I am as a person. I've been practicing since about 2014, 2015. That was the first time I submitted my work to show publicly here in the Bahamas, and I've been doing it consistently since then. I want to take us to the first slide, which is from my first exhibition, my first solo exhibition here at the University of the Bahamas. It was called Tough, and all of the works were self-portraits. This one is It's Me Again, Ja, acrylic on canvas, and as I said, lots of self-portraiture, all dealing with the body as content, and looking at flesh and hand positioning to kind of tell the story about what's going on and what's my idea of self. There's really no environment in these works. It's all contained in the body. And we see some evidence of the kind of stripped down hand that will come much later and hopefully come even further. Yeah, that's one of my favorites. That one is Dreams. And even though the figure is female, I still consider the work to be a self-portrait because what you see in the work is evidence of what's going on behind the work too, right? So some people tell stories in their work. They start at the beginning, they bring you through the middle, and they hit you with the end. And you feel the work as round as that in front of the work. You can experience this is where the story begins, this is where the story gets good, and this is where it ends. But I think in my work, I'm trying more actively to express a moment and maybe stretch a moment and leave instances in that moment for you to enter the work and ask questions that will open up a story for you, much rather than, you know, get into a narrative and articulate a particular thing. And I think this is something that comes directly out of my understanding of Bahamian art, as well as my understanding of African art and Black art in general. And we'll get into that more when we go to the breeze blocks. But we can, yeah, this is a work that comes a little bit later in my practice, around 2020. At this time, I would have, so the first works that I showed in the slides, the first works that we were looking at were all from my university days here in the Bahamas. And this is the first works when I'm coming back home after attempting to go off to school and being sent home by COVID and a myriad of other decisions and reasons. But the works now step away from the figure completely and become sculptural, and they are even less narrative, although conceptually the works become more narrative, right? So a layer that I introduced into the process at this stage in the work is the titles. And if we go to the next slide, we'll see, yeah. So that one was To Carry Water from the Well, and this one is To Drink Blood. Both like kind of overt references to mythology or scripture and text and story in that way. But again, what's happening in the visual is very much about the moment, is very much about all of these little expressive things that, separate from maybe the title or the idea that they are on an artwork and somebody is trying to express something to me, you could mistake them for nothing, right? You can mistake these objects as being something that's just in the environment found, maybe something that's not very important, you know? We could go to the next one. And this work is also very special to me from right around that same time as well. This was shown in the National Art Gallery. It was curated into an exhibition of murals. And with this work, we see me come back to painting a little bit and come back to figurative elements, but again, they stay in this symbol hieroglyphic kind of state because, once again, the narrative is not the end-all, be-all of the work, but it's kind of a way in which we can intersect with the work and find some jumping off points to ask questions about what I might be I don't want to say pontificating, but what I might be posing to the audience's truth, what I might be suggesting to you is going on, or what I might be critiquing. So in this work we see, it's called I Have a Hammer, Lend Me a Drill, which is a reference to a song that I really like, a reggae song that I like. And lots of the titles, when they're not about text, they're about music and other art forms. And like I said, it's a way to reconnect with an already existing narrative, stretch that narrative, and maybe reinterpret that narrative and use that as a way to interact with the audience already in a place, right? So we have the rhythm of Dawe Congo's Together thing, which is a song that's all about work, right? It's all about, there are tasks that we have to do and I can't do them alone, you can't do them alone, so we have to do them together. I have a hammer, lend me a drill, right? So the work is a mural, and the idea was that it would go into the public space, and it was right around the time that elections were coming up. So the idea that I had in mind was that the work would go up on an abandoned building that most likely would then have become prime real estate for election posters and these things like that. And you better believe the next election, that building was covered in election posters and all of that. The work didn't get to live in the space at the same time as those posters, but I think that it's very clear, you know? In the hieroglyphs, we see the hands, and hands are, for me, a direct commentary on what can be done, right? Because as artists, we use our hands to make things, and most times the things that we're making, people say, oh wow, I would have never thought to make that, you know? So there's always this idea of what can be done. And also there is the idea of what has been done, right? Hands perpetuate things. They perpetuate violences, they care for us, they clean us up, they check for us, you know? So hands become that kind of symbol of action, of going between, of going to. And with this work, what I really wanted to say to people is that the work being done comes to be done with tools, and these are the tools. And we have the hand, and then you have the coin and the voter's card, which, like the hands, are objects of actions, right? And are objects in which you are directly influencing your environment with their existence and with your own morality of them, right? You really like fruits, so you want to buy the best fruits in Nassau. You're gonna go to the place that has the fruit stand that is clean and it feels safe when you're there, and all of the fresh fruit is beautifully displayed. But you didn't bring a fruit tester kit with you, you know? You didn't bring a ruler to measure all of your oranges. There's a kind of knowing that comes from the decision, and that decision is an extension of your own understanding that I can know that there's right happening here, and I can know that there's wrong happening here. And in my decision making, I'm affecting what else is available for everybody else. I'm affecting the environment. I'm shifting what it is. And the same kind of influence that we shift with our coin, we shift with our voter's card. And in the center of both of those icons, I present the cutlass, this is, I think, the first time that I use it in an artwork. And since then, I've used it many times. But the cutlass is a promise, right? John Beadle has a work in Another Man's Yard that's currently on view in the National Collection, and it's a tower of cutlasses. And the work is just as much a threat as it is an invitation in a lot of ways, right? The cutlass becomes symbolic of, again, like hands, the work that can be done and the work that is being done, because when you see a man with a cutlass in Nassau, he's often doing work. He's cleaning something, he's, you know, cutting down some brush to clear the road for somebody. But the cutlass has a wider context in the diaspora and in the African canon of objects, right? Because of its use in things like political revolt, or in its use of self-defense, or just the idea that there are many Bahamian men who, because it's not legal to bear arms to carry and protect yourself, they drive and there's a cutlass under their car. So it's this promise that there is a work that I am willing to do, that I am not doing now, that is near to me. And what kind of work I will do with that, it doesn't really matter, you know? The intensity of the idea of, because I've had to touch this thing, is what makes the symbol so important and so menacing and so much of a threat. I hope that makes sense. Let's go to the next slide, yeah. Yeah, these are more works from my practice. We can move through these, but I just want to show you the dog, iterations of the dog, iterations of the landscape, abstractions of that. Once again, the dog, this is, if it is yours, then take it. This piece is a shield, and it's a kind of interpretation of an award that my father won and kept in the house for a long time. It was his best recruit to the Defense Force, and it always struck me as like a strange object, you know? But yeah, that's that. Next slide, please. Yeah, and then more iterations of the dog and more iterations of like that duality of fragility and beauty, as well as this dark and light concept, right? So we have ideas in the dog skull and again in the cutlass about darker things that, you know, death and, you know, anger, yeah, whatever. But still in there, in this idea and in this conversation that death is thing and it's looming and it's coming and it's ever present and, you know, pain is there and all of that, there is the reality of the fact that death is just a part of it, you know? Before people die, there's all of this life that they have, and it's full of beautiful things. And sometimes the things are beautiful just for you, you know. You will have moments with your family members that you won't have to share. They'll just be particular moments for you. They'll just be things to venerate and obsess about for you, you know. And once the dying happens, it's less of a for you moment. Somehow you remember all of it happening like it happened. Everybody experienced the love that I experienced. Everybody knows my grandmother's the best cook in the world, you know? Everybody, why isn't there just a complete stop and a parade to celebrate this thing and this person that I know is everything? But the world turns again, and that moment goes into the next moment, and you move on to the next death to obsess and mourn about. And I think that's a beautiful thing. Yeah, let's look at some more slides. Yes. All right. So a basket to carry water enough. We're revisiting. We're getting really close now to where we are here, and this is works that I would have made 6 months ago, 8 months ago. And I would have been making these sculptures, the cutlass that we just saw in the slide before, and this included, for the better part of 3 years. And the sculptural works are very much driven by the same things these works are driven by, this idea of what is and what isn't, what is important and what isn't important, and critiquing that and challenging that. Also the idea of spirit and what comes to live inside a thing and inside a person. And I was using the vessel as a metaphor for personhood in a lot of ways, and a metaphor for what a person could hold and what could be held in a moment. And I think that there were some successful moments in that work. This one is in the National Collection. Yeah. And now we're into the present. Yeah. This one is Who Comes to Be Held in My Arms. This body of work, and I think things take a big shift here because my daughter is born after, these works are made and my daughter is here. So I'm thinking a lot about myself, but not in a way like I have to be aware of my own self because it's good for me to be aware of it, you know? And I have to be in control of my own self because it's good for me to be in control of my actions. But it's an awareness that, okay, nobody cares about whether or not I can control myself for my own good anymore. And now it's about whether I can control myself for the good of the people who I support and stand in for and will stand on me, you know? And Who Comes to Be Held in My Arms, in a lot of ways, is a portrait of me and Ruth, right? But it's just me in the figure, and the arms kind of suggest this holding of her, kind of suggest maybe that they're used to do that. And the conversation is about, or the reflection is about what's happening in the figure, right? Why the mask, why the line work, why the intensity of things, why gentle, why soft. All of these questions come to help us understand who we're interacting with when we're interacting with the work. And the material becomes really important to me too, because like I said, it's not a story that's told in words, so we have to tell it in apparatus and in hieroglyphs and in suggestions. And I like to suggest the state of things by presenting to you the state of things, right? So when things are secure and stable and rigid and immoving, that's the state of things. That's what I'm trying to articulate to you. And when things are in flux, when things feel like they are in a state of collapse, that comes to be very important as well in the work and in the story. If you know Nassau, if you know these islands, you know that they are in a state of collapse. It's beautiful to be here and it's lovely to be here, and I really wouldn't want to be anywhere else, but still the things are in a state of collapse, you know, and that's the conversation that I'm trying to have in the work. Because the truth of the matter is, it's really moving out of a place of deep love, right? I love artists. They make beautiful things, and I reference their work in my work. I reference their stories in my stories. And sometimes I see a harder interaction than they see, or I lean towards a more tragic story maybe than some artists do, but it's never lost on me how much comes to be in a moment. And Mr. Edwards is an artist, you know. He's been working here in this space for a long time, and he's my professor now. We're sitting down and we're having to talk together, and that's evidence of two things that are true about this space. One, that the space is small enough that, you know, you can be in proximity to people, and that makes a big difference in the learning and in the understanding of things. But also it speaks to how there can often be no place else to stand, right? It's not, I don't think, it's not because I'm such a special man that I have a child and she loves me and, you know, I get to experience that. But it's because I am a man, you know, I have existed in this space at this time, and these things come together so that I can experience them in their fullness and their fruitfulness, and I'm taking part of that with awareness and without ego. And when I'm making the work, I'm critiquing that place. I'm looking to that place and I'm trying to understand why could it be in that through no special action of my own, I come to exist in the same place and time as all of these things. And that's why the work, like I say, comes to be about joy and comes to be about the other side of that too. Let's look at some more paintings. Yeah, dogs. So I want to talk a bit about the dogs. And the dogs is a good place to get into this. So the dogs, three things I really want to talk about when I talk about the dogs. I have to talk about the mythology, right? And I've talked a little bit about that. And you're starting to get a feel for the idea of why my paintings are a narrative, because it's all happening for me at the same time, right? I'm thinking about all of the stories that I know about dogs, my own stories, the lived ones, my own interactions with dogs, and then I'm thinking about things like ancient stories about dogs. I'm thinking about Cerberus, the defender of the underworld, you know, the guardian of the underworld, and the three-headed dog, and the ideas of what kind of personhood is behind the analogy of that idea, right? This three-headed dog. Three heads to me says three brains, three sets of ideas, three sets of thinking. So not only is this dog in between me and where I need to be, or me and where I don't need to be, but it has three different heads and perspectives of thought to consider devouring me or, you know, protecting me. And that's very interesting, and I think about that often. You also have Remus and Romulus, who become very important to me, and we see a reference to them in the earlier work, A Woman Gives Birth to Rome, the drawing of the dog next to the breeze blocks. And Romulus and Remus are important because those of you who don't know, there's a mythology that Rome is started by two orphans who are raised by a dog in the wilderness. And that's about all that's important to the story. But I have a brother, and he is like me, but a little bit larger. So we're two dogs of the same face and the same set of teeth and two brains thinking about which way to eat you, you know? And I like to think about it as that. And the personification fits seamlessly with my living. And I, from that place, am looking at the relationship of dogs in the wider environment and how we interact with them and how that interaction shapes our understanding of them, right? So let me get a little bit more specific because I'm up in the abstraction. So the idea of teeth and trust come into it. All dogs have teeth, all dogs have our trust to some degree, or have someone's trust, because that's the relationship. They're man's best friend, they all exist in domesticity. There's no such thing as really a stray or a wild dog in the context of, you know, a cityscape like this. They all come from someplace. And we have varying levels of trust towards them, no matter, and it doesn't matter how they manifest themselves. It could be a big dog, it could be a little dog, but your trust is purely decided upon your own personal relationship with that dog's teeth. You know, if you know that sometimes he'll nip me, but you know, it's okay, he knows that I'm feeding him and it's fine, you don't react to it. But if it's your first time feeding this dog and you've never had to trust him and have that trust reaffirmed with health and safety, it's a different interaction. And that personification and that possibility into the interaction lives in the paintings in a need to talk about how people interact in the space and how they come to interact with me. So I guess in the lot, the dogs are self-portraits mostly as well. Yeah. Let's look at some more dogs. Yeah, this one. It's another sketch I'm working on. Yeah, and I step forward. Roofing paper. Yeah, there are magic, there is ancient things. And again, we see that reference in this work again to the mother of Remus and Romulus in that last work, where I'm having this conversation about age as well as the passage of time, as well as boundary, and we really see the breeze blocks come into it. We'll talk about those a little bit more later. We could go to the next word, yeah. The snakes. That last work is called The Snake Can Smell a New Baby. And it's the first large-scale work that I've worked on with the snakes, but I've been drawing them for about a year before the baby came, and not based on anything, just kind of working out my practice. At the time, I was working in an environment where I didn't have as much time in the day to make full works, and I was kind of maybe thinking that maybe I wouldn't be able to make more works. But the minute I stepped away from that, and now it came to be Ruth is in the picture, and I got my new studio. These works came forward in a really powerful way, and the snakes and the dogs came to sit in the work in a way that they hadn't before, and they have kind of switched places with the self-portrait in my practice in a lot of ways, because there's a rounder way I can get the audience to engage with what they're viewing, right? I'm saying that to you like you're not the audience, but when it's a portrait of me, the conversation is first about blackness, right? Because I'm painting this black face, and there's all of these things to be dealt with in that. And maybe I want to deal with that, but maybe I don't. Maybe it's just a distraction. And after that, there's the masculinity that has to be dealt with, which comes to be just as much as a distraction and just as much as a violence to talk about in a lot of ways. So it doesn't sit, and it's not wide enough of a conversation. But with the snakes and the dogs, there's this hand on nature that allows for a universality that's still kind of locked into a place and time and a scheme and a framework of understanding, because these are symbols so intricately tied to our understanding of symbols at all, right? Very early in the Bible, you learn about the snakes and their evilness. You learn that in Genesis, right? If you go to, I guess, Mayan temples and these things like that, snakes and the ever-presence of that and the feathered serpent is very clear, because you just look through the pictures and you see them. They're there on the hieroglyphs. They're there up and down the stairs and the facade of the building. And the same thing with our ideas around dragons and the Chinese and their relationship to lions and the food dog, right? All of these are steeped in our understanding of symbolism because we are interacting with them constantly. There's all of these different layers to interact with them at, and interact with them with pop culture, music, like I said. But outside of just the wideness and the scope of it, a part of the particularness of why snakes in the work too is because of the just assumed animosity of them, right? In my notes, I have the questions that snakes pose to us. Snakes pose, they will say that I'm evil anyway, right? Because it's a snake. It's evil anyway. It's here to poison me. It's here to kill me, attack me in some way, in that way. And you learn this as a kind of self-preservation. But it's not something grounded in any kind of reality or any kind of idea about what the snake is or who the snake is. It's just a kind of assumption, and we read it into the environment, and it's true after that. I am evil anyway. This kind of truth about the snake, that the snake is poisonous, it is dangerous, it is seeking to do me harm because it's in its nature to do me harm in that way. And that's an interesting layer when we come to place it on top of people, not only on top of ideas of self, but on top of ideas of others, right? Because if I'm interacting with you and the idea is to give you the benefit of the doubt is that I'm giving you the benefit that you will see me as a person and want to treat me with kindness too. Not the benefit of the doubt that you will respect yourself in this moment and only treat me in a way that keeps me outside of the bounds of your safety, if we're following me and that makes sense, yeah? Let's look at the other snake, evening time. And in this one, the snake is present also with the feet. And the feet have their own kind of suggestions and symbolisms, but we get this kind of idea that the two things are in relationship in some way, right? Maybe the feet are standing on the snake because that symbolism is very forward to us. We've seen that before. And maybe also because, you know, the idea of a snake striking at your ankles is something in our mind too, right? That's just where we see them in the environment. But because the feet they have this transparency, they have this, where are they? And the question isn't so much about the snake, I think in this work we have more of a question. It seems a little bit less resolved maybe, because there's more of a question about what is the intent of the things in this picture. Everything is kind of positioned in a way that there isn't this clear articulation of what is to happen or what will happen, or that narrative is gone, right? So really relying on just the way things are laid in the photo to give the audience some ideas about where we're going and how we're going. And the mark making and allusions to a pathway and pathways kind of lend for that too, right? But again, this idea of the nature of the snake. What is its interaction with me? How am I to interact with it? It's not, I'm not, at least I don't think that I advance it pertinently, because you can't, right? It's all about that perspective, and that perspective helps to talk about the power dynamic, which I'll get into a little bit later. But that takes me into what I really want to talk about when I talk about snakes, but I want to look at the idea of enemies and adversaries as opportunities to mirror oneself, right? Or look at oneself and think about their own actions, because I am somebody's adversary and somebody's enemy, you know, no matter what. Because I can stand here, but because I'm standing here having the talk, this is a position that somebody else is not occupying. And because of that, our relationship is more or less adversarial, you know? And I'm trying to look at people who could possibly exist in that kind of adversarial relationship with me, where it's through no fault of their own, we are at opposite ends of the tug-of-war rope, and both of us are minded to pull, and we have to pull, and still find some compassion for them at the end of the day. Because if I am the snake and I am to be pursued throughout the house and throughout the yard with cutlass and rock and snake and bottle and dog and foot and hand and all of these things you go to destroy adversaries with, I hope that they come with the mindset and the idea that I just was looking for, you know, an egg or two to eat, so that I can go and advance my life and slither somewhere else, or maybe a cool spot to sun myself in for the day or two, and that room for one is room for two, hopefully. Let's look at some more stuff. Yeah, the snake again. So in this work, which is one of my I really enjoyed making this work. It's I don't have any sketches for this work. I have a really rigid sketch practice, and just about all the works that you've seen, I have sketches and sketches and sketches of. But this work I don't have a sketch for, because the imagery was very forward in my mind. It's called Nigeria. Stop me if you've heard this one before. And somebody made a joke about Nigeria, and it was a good joke. It was a funny joke. It hit all the right notes, you know? But I just couldn't laugh at it right then. And I made the work about it, and in the work, I'm laughing, you know? And what I wanted to celebrate with this work is this idea that the continent is a place distant from where I am, right? Nigeria is a place distant from where I am. I've never been. I don't know anybody that's been. But the people tell me all the time that I'm an African, you know? And my grandmother was born in 1935 in Nassau, and her birth certificate says African. It doesn't say black, it doesn't say black Bahamian, it says African, you know? And this idea of where the continent is and how it comes to be a part of our life is something that's true and not true, and imagined and unimagined and obsessed over and fantasized about. So in this work, I'm kind of allowing myself to have a fantasy that exists in the stereotype and in the negative stereotype and in the mindless, confusing stereotype, but it's still mine, you know? It's mine to have. And I'll have Nigeria, I'll have the slums, I'll have the the best parts, I'll have the good food, I'll be confused by the language I don't know and the places I don't know, but I'll put the soil between my toes and under my fingers and in my hair, and I'll make the decision about what I will not have, you know? Yeah. Yeah. This is a message about Babylonia. That's the title of this work. It's my favorite piece in the show in a lot of ways. We see the breeze blocks, we see the snake, we see the dog, all the symbols that are really, really important to me right now. And the overarching theme of hierarchies and this kind of two-party political system of binary good and evils and only wrong and right sit very forward in this work because there's no really decision being made, right? All of it is your implication. You don't know how these things come to be, but they sit in this space in conflict and in tension and imbalance with each other. And in that, they have to negotiate a way to live, right? And much of our world is like that right now, and that's why my practice is like that. I'm aware that yes, I have my own individual joys and my own individual stories to tell. I could talk to you about all the little African things I want. But deep down inside, there's still all of these things that have to coexist in the space together, not together, you know, on top of each other. We can go to the next slide. Yeah, the breeze blocks. These images are references to, well, they're the main references that I use when I think about the anciency of the breeze blocks, right? We talked about Africa a little bit, and Africa comes to be really important to me in the work because of this idea of home. I have a home, and it's here, and I enjoy it, but there's a wider home that people have too, right? In our heritage and in our understanding of what that means for all of us, we have a self-contained, like an identity, a starting point, an understanding, a framework. You pick up a religion from your family, you pick up a goal set, right? Like what can be attained, there's something you learn from your family, right? You see people and they say to you, you're a smart person, you should try to be a doctor, or you're a smart person, you like books, you should be a librarian. So that's what I mean by it's something you attain from them. Because some people have interactions with their family where they say, you really are not good at math, you're so stupid and all of these things like that. And I'm not trying to focus on that, but just the idea that there is a source for all of us and it comes with time and you come to this place over time, and like I say, my supposed source is there. I reach back often and I find myself in the identity easier than I do in contemporary paintings sometimes that aren't African-based or European Renaissance painting. I can connect with the idea of the prowess of the work and the technicality and the proficiency of that. And also I can connect with, you know, the universal stories about love and about death and pain and all of that. But there's a particular hair to split. Me and Amani, we talk about hair splitting all the time. Because for artists of us emerging artists who are new to the game, who have seen Mr. Edwards and Schmidt and Kendall and Stan Burnside make tirelessly and start their conversations anew and not anew. For us, the conversation is all about hair splitting. And for Africa, it's about hair splitting for me. For the now, in the present, it's about hair splitting because so much of the narrative is already said. These breeze blocks, they live here in the environment, but they come from this place. And in this iteration, they are carved into the stone of a cathedral, and the stone of that cathedral is a mountain, you know? So when I look at a house here, I have to think about the idea that this symbol is derived from the idea that it could be carved in stone in a cathedral in a mountain. Abstract again, but you know, it's what makes the work special to me. I think I have 2 more of these, yeah. And lots of them are very cruciform like this, so there's also this, you know, direct spirituality to the objects and to its manifestations. And you kind of have to think of them in this way, you know, in this intense, intentional spirituality. They are also born of an intense, intentional spiritual tradition. They come out of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church faith tradition, and it's thousands of years old, and they do it all the same way. They're basically African Catholics. Yeah. So this idea of ritual also becomes very important to the work because of this idea of visitation and revisitation too. Let's go. Yeah, let's go to the next thing.
There's
Yeah.
2 more images.
Yeah. Let's.
Want to wrap it up? Okay. 2 more.
Next, we go to the next thing. Yeah, you can scroll through these. Yeah, these are just kind of referencing the body and talking about the body, because that is the last kind of forward symbol in the work. This idea of hands and feet and where they sit and what they come to articulate. It's not really about articulating a gesture, but it's about the hands disembodied from the figure themselves are a kind of allusion to divine presence in some ways, but also an allusion back to this idea about action and about what can be enacted. And the feet come to speak more about being rooted and what it means to be planted in a space intentionally, and how those things come to be important in the work.
Maybe we should
let's open up for questions and stuff.
So I'll just say before questions, one of the things that I'm intrigued by in your work is, and you said it at the beginning, is the duality, right? This kind of play with symbols and iconography. I think you had an image of one of the first images of the machete, right? And kind of how that kind of speaks to, at the same time, an object of labor, but also there's a history to it, right?
Yes.
It's a revolutionary tool. And you have a clever way of playing with symbols, you know, the breeze blocks, and we'll talk about the dog and the snake. But my first question to you is, I'm again intrigued by titles, and you seem to, as a way of entering the work, you seem to have this way of titles and kind of hooking on titles. So Wings of a Dove, can you speak to that in terms of the inspiration? How did you kind of encapsulate all of the work, the body of work? Where did Wings of a Dove, how did that come about? Because it speaks to freedom, peace. I mean, there's all sorts of things that's invoked by Wings of a Dove. Can you speak to that? What inspired you?
Wings of a Dove comes back to talk about birds and nature and power again, right? So the overarching theme of the work is, I guess, this kind of hierarchical power structure and how we come to figure out where things play and exist in that and where our position is in that. And the Wings of a Dove speaks to a kind of aspiration I have, you know, of this flightlessness and this, but a flightlessness into having the capacity for flight, right? And this is idea of escape. There's also a Kamau Brathwaite poem, also titled Wings of a Dove, that I really enjoy and have been going back to over and over again as I make this work. And the poem is largely about power structure. It's about who is where in the power structure and why they come to sit there and how they come to navigate it. But the title itself is this very gentle, elegant thing, and everything I've said so far is a little bit on the heavier side, but there's this lighter hand, and it seems to be like an almost awareness of the lightness, of the light, of an awareness that, yeah, okay, so what? It's war. So what? It's wartime right now. But there's doves, and they have wings, and they're beautiful. And there are some doves that live in my area, and I don't actually see them anywhere else on the island. And they're white, and the tips of their wings are black, and they're called pied imperial pigeons. Mm-hmm. They're good size, and they have this kind of elegance, this kind of like nothing wants to destroy them, you know? Mm-hmm. And I hope that wings, that element of wings is something that I'm hoping for myself, and I'm hoping for the work, and I'm moving towards in the work. I hope that makes sense.
It does. Before we open it up, speak to the show before this one, the Invisible Returns.
Invisible Returns.
And that the choice to show with two other artists. How does that work inform this? Was that one body of work, or was it two separate iterations?
Yeah, so I guess originally it was two separate iterations, but looking at them now, they're definitely closer to one body of work. This painting, well, these two paintings, this one, which is Woe, There Is a Dread, and the next painting, Egret, Gull, and Crow, they both were started for Invisible Returns. And the idea was to work them and get them into the show, but the other works developed faster, and they developed better, and they were the correct works. They sat in the space with the other works best, and that was the correct curatorial decision. What's connected in these works is this shift in my perspective about self, as well as, I guess, my shift in the ask of the audience about the question about self. I would say that these two works in particular are more about this idea of war and peace, and the Invisible Return works is all about this internal war and peace, right? And these works are about a universal war and peace in a wider kind of way. Yes. Okay. Yeah, I would say this is the peace one, and that's the war one. That's how I see it, you know? Okay. Especially with birds, right? Because that's what you think, birds of peace. That's a part of the connection. And even in the symbolism of the three birds, the egret, the garland, and the crow, I think those are three things of peace, right? Death is an omen of peace in a lot of ways, and that's the crow. The garland is a trickster in this space, and that's a kind of omen of peace too, because to trick you means that I sit in a proximity to you that it's inappropriate for me to engage in outright violence with you. Right? And that's I think a very Bahamian hair to split. But yes, that's how I feel about the garland. And then the egret is, any of you who've seen an egret, they're these tall white birds, and they have the long neck, and they're always like in the middle of a ballet. And they have these very light, wispy feathers on the tail, and it's this peace, it's this divinity, and this, I've never seen a dirty one before. They always are spotless, clean feathers. That purity, it's an extension of that peace to me. Yeah.
Okay, let's, are there any questions from the audience? I have a lot more questions, but let's open it up. Any questions for Matthew?
Sorry, go ahead. Go, sir.
Keith, go ahead, Keith.
So one of the things I believe was curious about what you kind of answered in your speech.
Awesome.
Was a lot of your work is in some way, shape, or form a self-portrait. I've been following it for a long time. And no matter how you decide to create the work, whether it's in concrete or drawing or painting or whatever, it's always like a resemblance of self. So in this exhibition is much more like self, but like in symbols. And how you spoke about like the snake, and two things that like was cool to me is like you said you try to move away from having self-portraits because like the first conversation is blackness, and then the like second conversation right after that would be like you have to respond to that space. But with snakes is like you make the connection of self with the snake because the same level of like respect that the snake would want, so that it feels safe in that space and you feel safe in that space. It's the same way that I feel like a lot of artists have to be within like the way that they move around. And I just wanted to ask you like, how are you now taking that conversation and expanding on that? Like, is there going to be more symbolism? Because I feel like you have to have like a moment where people get to talk to you about the work, for people to really be able to digest it, because abstraction is a very difficult thing to digest. And I feel like this conversation that you have today is drastically changed the way I view the work, even though we have like many conversations about the work. But how do you see yourself expanding on this body of work?
That's a brilliant question. Thank you. And I've already started that expansion quite a bit. I've already started quite a bit. So the first step, I think, is with a lot of a lighter hand, right? So delicacy is something I've been reaching towards in the work. And I think it goes back to you, that idea of the snake, about like trying to create a space where I'm receiving the kind of energy I'm supposed to receive. So I'm trying to put out this delicacy and feel this delicacy, because that's what is needed, you know? We need a little bit of a softer hand. It's that hand that needs to split the hair. So I'm looking forward to being able to show the audience a softer touch. I think I'm doing that all the time though. But yeah. I'm also looking forward to expanding and just stretching the way that the snake can present itself. In most iterations, the snake is very much like an alive thing, right? But that starts to change in some of the newer iterations, and I think it really flips the hierarchy of the moment, right? Because if I'm interacting with the snake and I know that the snake is poised and in a striking position, it's very much different than I'm interacting with a dead snake. Yeah. And lots of etchings. Yeah, etchings. But in this next body of work, mostly I'm coming to expand it with expansion of the process first, and then afterwards will be lots of curatorial conversation to narrow the conversation to the place where it needs to be again, right? Because the kind of artist that I am and the kind of person that I am, I have a macro view of things. I like 7 things in my pocket at once, you know? I like 15 different flavors of Skittles to eat at one time. So that's also the way I make work. I'm currently working on etchings. I'm currently working on woven works. I'm currently working on sculpture. I'm currently working on paintings. And that's the next thing I didn't really say in this, but these are all really drawings to me, right? They're on stretched canvas and all of that, but the way that they exist is really, really a drawing. So with the painting stage of it, the idea is that they will get more of the hand too, right? Because that's a painting.
So talk a bit more about that, your process. How do you approach these drawings / paintings / prints?
The drawings really are about composition. They're really about where and on what is in front of what and how, and the things have to touch in just the right way so that I can feel the little queasy feels on the inside, you know? But aside from the mystical parts of the work and in the physical of the object, the process is really about looking and trying to articulate what I see very directly. I know that I have a hard way, and I'm okay to have the hard way, and I think that it's a necessary part of the conversation, and I enjoy having the conversation the hard way. And that's what I'm working towards. So I like the fact that I'm in contact with the material a lot. I like that my whole process is charcoal and pencil and a lot of priming of the canvas, because it looks unprimed, but
It is primed?
Yeah, all of the works are primed.
Okay.
So I spend, maybe if I have 3 months to work in the studio, I'll spend the first month and a half priming the surfaces. And then I'll spend the next 2 weeks panicking about the work.
All right.
And sketching and compiling sketches, right? Because what also is happening is whilst I'm priming and whilst I'm thinking about the work, I'm doing my small sketches in the corners of notebooks and
Okay, so you are
on old
making
receipts.
sketches. So you're making 20, 30, 50 sketches and then using those as studies for the larger pieces.
100%. Some of the sketches that I use for this work are 3 years old. Some of the sketches, like the dog sketches, I have 25, 30 plates of dogs that have not been seen yet. So every day I sketch a new dog. Every day I sketch a new snake. It's always that part of it. What really comes to be decided in the studio is just how all of those things interact and where they interact on the canvas, and what works and what doesn't.
I know.
I just have a quick question. You talked a lot about symbolism. I think the lack of narrative in the work, and I'm wondering, especially the work I'm seeing in front of me, like in the gesture of the man holding the cutlass, there it seems to be like a movement, like that hand that's maybe is gonna get bit by the dog or maybe not. There seems to be like an element almost of flash photography, like there is like a prelude to a narrative. Is that fair to kind of assess? And then also the second question is that they seem to be like very aggressively, monumentally expressed images of kind of like micro instances, like very small, almost metaphorical things. They're not like epic landscapes of anything. They seem to be like you're focusing on the maybe or the maybe not.
Yeah.
In that kind of the dog almost biting the hand, in the swinging of the cutlass, and some of the other examples that you've shown. I'm just wondering if that's accurate, and if so, like where does that come from? How forefront in your brain is that? Like, is that something you're addressing? Is there something that you edit in the work in your drawings, or is that organic?
Yeah, I think for the drawings, and this ties back to why they're not paintings and why they're drawings, right? Because in the paintings, I think I would lean towards creating an overall environment for the story and situation to take place in. But as a drawing, there doesn't seem to be the need for that in the kind of communication in the same way, at least not in how I understand the drawing to exist. And you're correct in that. It is a micro moment, and it is a very kind of deliberate avoidance at articulating a particular place in the time of now, because what is important is the contact, in the maybe of the cutlass, in the movement of the hand, in the dance, in the drawings. And that's why the drawings in the back room are like so like my favorite. I love how nothing they are, because like so much of the environment has to be suggested in them, and the only way you can read the environment and any suggestions about what the environment is you have to make a decision in your mind about what that dog is motioning me towards or away from, or what is the kneeler kneeling for, where are they. You have to make that decision first before you have any kind of interaction with the environment as a self. And I think this is also coming out of just a Bahamian canon kind of understanding too, right? When I think about how we articulate self, there's all of this conversation about the landscape, but it's not the landscape as like how it's talked about in Baroque paintings, like it's landscape as entity, you know? When Tessa paints landscape, it's not landscape with trees and void of spirit, it's landscape as spirit, you know? And because I wasn't having a conversation about landscape in this moment, it's more important for you to interact with interaction as landscape, or conflict as landscape, and let the landscape develop out from those things, you know? Maybe that's very abstract and like a big shoot for, but that's the gun, you know?
It's interesting how you talk about the softness of your hand. And a lot of these are not soft at all, right? There's a kind of heavy-handedness, but there's a softness, and again, the duality, right? With kind of playing with your kind of mark making again.
Yeah, and that has to do a lot with the kind of idea of control and resistance and restraint, right? And all artists know that the work takes those things. It takes all of those things, and it has to be those things, because that's where technique comes in. You can control a brush when you can move it with restraint. You can turn it from high intensity moment to low intensity moment and back again without losing your hand, you know? And I say that the work is restrained, and I say that the work is gentle because I know what it takes to get to this point, you know? And I know that I'm coming down to this because it's decisive decision making, you know? Yeah. It's not like I go into the studio and I just empty myself on the painting. I'm an expressionist because I feel things deeply, and I like to talk about the things that I feel deeply, but not because I have nothing else in the work but the emotion, or I am coming to the work with nothing else but the emotion. I'm taking every sketch and the expressionist idea of, you know, instinctive movement in that one sketch, and I bring that moment to come and be had again in the next sketch, and then in the next, and then in the painting again, you know?
Absolutely.
Last question.
No, go ahead.
Please.
So I always find that when the work gets larger, it becomes more performative, just by the nature of it, including your body into it. Like, you have to use more of your body to make the work. Can you speak a little bit, very briefly, about how important, how important these works are as evidence of the performance of your problem solving, not just the problem solving?
Instinctually, I say yes, it's very important that the audience see me perform, almost like you can feel me paint them a little bit. All of the works are just out of reach, just in the reach of my arm, you know? The largest work is just at my maximum. I can reach the top edge of the painting and the bottom edge without having to change my feet, you know? And that's important because of what kind of energy it allows me to bring to the physicality of making and interacting with the work, and it allows me to interact with the work physically as content, you know, and this is, you know, just artist conversation, right? But that's what excites me, that kind of part of it. So that comes to be very, very important. And I think when doing that, and especially because the elements of the painting are then so heavily tied with natural things and natural objects, the parameters and the perspectives and the proportions that the works then come to sit in and be in relationship about are very almost directly tied to the proportions of my body, and or at least my understanding of my own body in that way. Yeah, I think it's also connected to this idea of back to like how the work can be a self-portrait. That idea of scale is very tied to this idea of self and self-portraiture in the work, and wrestling with this kind of size and taking up space and all of that.
So breeze blocks and dogs, what's the connection between them? What would you say? So for instance, you said that this piece is your favorite piece. Could you speak to that in terms of why is that the favorite for you?
I think it's a favorite for me because it has the hard edges everywhere where I would like the edges to be hard, and then there's lots of space to have soft, weepy moments, because those moments are really important too. I also think that, I hope that it's a challenge to the audience. It's saying to the audience, and forcing them to like really work through the imagery of it, you know, and it's not coming to you easy. If you walk away from this painting with a feeling or an understanding, it's one you arrived at the front of that painting, you know. It's not something that just occurred to you. And I think articulating myself in this way at this scale has allowed for me to make the same kind of gestural movements, which are, you know, maybe not so put together, but still allow space for the audience to have a longer interaction with the work. The connection in the symbolism, I think, is really spot on too, in the black and white, the contrast of that, the lightness in the transparency of the canvas, and the way that speaks to the environment as well. I think this work has to have even less environment in it than that work, you know? Until you make the decision about if that white line is a snake or not, until you make a decision about what is the state of the snake, you know, that white line is suggesting to me, until you make a decision about who is the aggressor in the scenario, the ideas of environment can't start to take place for you, right?
Yeah, we had a long conversation about the dogs, right? And thinking about the local landscape. The pot cake, and how the pot cake becomes our livestock, right?
Yes.
Because the pot cake is everywhere. And then two, these breeze blocks, and how they're connected in terms of maybe security, surveillance, right?
Yes.
A filter of sorts. And so there is a kind of very strong historical connection between them, a narrative.
100%. This work, you have all of that, right? The Bahamian pot cake, which is, you know, as Bahamian as the flag is Bahamian, comes to be like symbolic of all of us and what care we deserve and come to accept and establish. But Bahamians, all of us have dogs, and some dogs have multiple owners. You know, like at the National Art Gallery, there's a dog, his name is Shadow. He comes to the National Art Gallery, he gets fed there, and everybody knows his name and they pet him. And there's a lady around the corner, he lives there as well. And she feeds him and she pets him, and he has a life there. And the same is true 2 stories down, you know, 2 houses down. And that idea of domesticity attached to this thing that outside of your own particular dome and your own, you know, connection is a violence. I think is a powerful idea when we think about the idea of self and what the average Bahamian comes to be, right? We've had even politicians who call themselves, you tell the people, I was a Bahamian pot cake, you know? So the whole idea of what that really comes to say about us is very crucial. And that everyday connection between the dog, the hand, the breeze block, and then layering on top of it the snake too, is a kind of quadrupling down on the everyday and the it's a consistent interaction. That's what I want to say. It's not so much every day. It's a forever, a perpetual interaction.
Yeah.
You know, one that stretches back to Africa. That's why Africa becomes important, because it's like no time between now and then has passed. No time between now and then. We're still in the same place. We're doing the same things. Yes, the headline is different. Yes, it's in newspapers now, but before it would have been whispered, you know, door to door. But essentially, the conflicts are still conflicts. It's still tribal war. It's still, you need to bring home something for the baby to eat tonight. It's still those, you know?
Connection, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So let's have one more question,
Yes,
and then
please.
we can wrap it up. Yes, sir.
Sure.
Thank you.
I started here and I listened to you talk about the methodology, mythology, and all the inspiration that got you to this place, right? I wanted to know, what did you discover about yourself putting this together? About Matthew.
That's powerful.
Great question.
Yeah.
Great last question, yeah. What did you learn about Matthew?
I'm still discovering things, but I think I discovered, probably what I discover every time I make work is that I'm a little bit softer than I remember, you know, and I'm a little bit more emotional than I remember, and sensitive, and if I can surprise my own self about that kind of need for care, and then I must be making that mistake with other people as well, you know? There must be a toe that I didn't mean to mash, that I have mashed, and I'm trying to work towards better, you know? And that's every part of the work. As an artist, I'm working towards better. As a person, I'm working towards better. As a Bahamian, I'm working towards better. As a father, I'm trying to work towards better. Because, I mean, what else is it for if not that at the end of the day, you know? Because I could make whatever. I could make 1,000 of these. It could be anything. It could be just circles. I'll still find something to mean in the work. I'll still find something to say and to take from the work. So why not that?
Absolutely. That's a great note to end on. So again, I want to thank you. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
You know, I've seen your practice for some years now, and I know that you're very serious about what you do in your practice, and so I think these kinds of conversations are very important to the local ecosystem. And again, I want to thank Mestre Projects for kind of just plugging in and adding to the conversation. It's going to be really interesting kind of moving forward to see the conversations that are happening in this space. And so again, you are the first one, right? And so we're looking forward to many, many more. So thank you for coming out on a Wednesday evening.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone.